Добрый день.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Inozemtseva Ekaterina. I'm General Director of the company Skoko Forum, and we are now starting our incredibly interesting and incredibly relevant session that is called The Day After Tomorrow, the Future of Medicine. And first of all, I would like to introduce our speakers who today will be talking about some technological trends, about those things and probably novelties, new trends in the sphere of medicine and their potential impact on the future of the humankind as well of the whole planet in general, and new approach in the sphere of healthcare in general. So today we are joined by Dr. Catherine Braunstein, representing here the Research Center of Orphan Diseases, Harvard Medical School, and we're also joined by Daniel Kraft, Executive Director of FutureMed in Silicon Valley, and also here represent Singularity University and representative of Standard University. We're also joined by Conkas, medical futurologist, entrepreneur, professor of molecular oncology, and a very popular international speaker, author of the book I'm No Longer Sick, and he head of Health House. And we are also joined by Professor Dmitry Yuryevich Pushkar, a specialist for urology at the Ministry of Moscow, and Neil Harbison, a very prominent figure, musician, painter, and also cyber activist. So when a year finishes, a lot of analysts and consultants usually issue quite an interesting overview of the main trends in different domains in science and technical domain. So I tried to also generate my own list and identify 10 key points that everybody is discussing. The first is transfer from treatment to prevention, and also thanks to introducing online monitoring for patients' health. Also robotization of medicine and robot-assisted operations, nanotechnologies, and they can also allow us to make medicine more targeted. And also use of gadgets, big data, artificial intelligence that can be used to process this data that could allow, from the point of view of analysts and experts, to really cut down and to decrease mortality rate, also caused by cardiovascular diseases, genetically engineered products and stuff, and engineering in general, also very much being discussed. 3D printing, also used in producing drugs, and 3D printing can also be tailored based on some individual needs of patients. And now you can even create a peel in form of a dinosaur, for example, and different new diagnostic marker, for example, box, and of course cyborgs. These new technologies that allow to overcome both some existing problems, physical, but also to create and generate some new properties in our life. We're trying to improve the quality of our life, and of course this is one of the key aspects and tasks that we are being exposed to, and this is one of the challenges for the leading economists. But I think that one of the most important directions, and it was mentioned as one of the basic trends, is of course creation of completely new drugs for engineering and molecular therapy, special instrument for molecular diagnosis. And that is why my first question goes to you, Catherine. Could you please say, so you are a specialist in the sphere of gene engineering. What kind of breakthrough can we already achieve today with your methods, and what could be we actually expect in future from this trend?
So at Boston Children's Hospital, we've been very fortunate that we have some really
forward thinkers that are not afraid to tackle the status quo and get the approvals, lobby Washington, figure out how to make things happen. One case where, I don't know if my slides can come up, but we had a case of Batten disease in a patient where you have intractable seizures and the prognosis is very dire. One child, her name is Mila, and my colleague Tim Yu was able to sequence the patient and find one mutation, but you really need 2 mutations in order to result in Batten disease. Since we knew that she had Batten, something else must have been going on. Meanwhile, every single day was counting. She was losing her sight, she was having intractable seizures multiple times a day. How do I advance the slides? Oh, thank you. This is the picture of the child. We're able to use this with the parents' permission. My colleague Tim Yu was able to figure out that going back and looking at the raw reads of the sequence, that there was a retrotransposon that was disrupting the splicing of the protein, and was able to design antisense oligo. This technology, again, had been around, but never applied in this method. And I think that's one of the important things to note here, that a lot of it isn't like straight inventions. It's an application of these different technologies and not being afraid to actually think like, okay, if we do this and we get the approval and we're able to apply this to a child, are we going to be able to make a difference? So here we were able, Tim was able to design the oligo, do the first test, go to Washington, get approval to try it, and do the first injection in a very incredibly rapid manner. And when you look at this slide at first, I was like, oh, that's not a very good curve, but when you look at the colors, the length and duration of the seizures has really decreased, and she had actually a seizure-free day, which was quite remarkable. Ultimately, we have extended the life of this child, something that would never be possible, and we are able to take the we just published this in New England Journal of Medicine a couple of weeks ago. But that's an extreme case. Like, there is an N of 1. It's very intense labor. It requires a physician who is willing to jump in and really tackle all the barriers that are required. But here we have a child, a family with 3 children, all are born healthy and then all of a sudden have a rapid decline, failure to thrive, and we can't figure out what's going on. You do straight regular sequencing and are able to narrow down candidates. There's nothing known here, and this is why it's notable, where of course we're talking about, like, in the age of next-gen sequencing, anyone can go through, get the sequence, diagnose, find a very good a diagnosis tool and figure out what's going on. But then you only diagnose around 30% of patients. For that other 70%, it requires manual labor to go through, figure out the good targets. And if you're able to narrow it down to 2 genes, my colleague Pankaj Agarwal was able to do this, and then rapidly figure out how to do a zebrafish screen and figure out that, okay, the zebrafish has a phenotype. Chances are that this is a recessive inheritance from the parents, and we're able to do family planning, and this family has gone on to have a healthy child. So really my summary here, and I apologize for going on, is that you can't be afraid. You have to think globally too, that it's important to have partnerships and to collaborate with Moscow and to collaborate with all over the world to turn these N of 1 cases into cohorts. Also to be able to not be afraid to just try things and apply new technologies or old technologies in new ways, and then also to keep a large network. It's important to be nice, it's important to have friends, it's important to be able to collaborate, and you can't be an expert in everything.
Thank you very much. So I think that Something that you have just said is really important also for us to understand where we're actually moving and we are moving with this genetic engineering and what kind of an opportunity this could give us. And my next question goes for Daniel Kraft. So you are founders of Intelligent Medicine. That is actually a platform of something that Catherine was talking about and the importance of this platform and this interaction. So this platform based on big data, integrated and personalized medicine. And you also founded Regiment System, a company that develops technologies in this domain, also for adults, based on stem cells. When I listen to your presentations, your speech, it seems like you're a guru, a specialist in all the domains of our future medicine. What kind of trends and directions could be regarded as the most breakthrough and the most important for the forthcoming 5 years?
Thank you. Well, I think when we think about today and the future of medicine, it's not about any one technology or any one breakthrough, but a real opportunity to put them together in very interesting new ways. Sometimes we don't need to invent anything new, we just need to connect the dots and put those into a solution. So if it was just, a Fitbit by itself, not so interesting, but now we can collect data from millions of patients wearing wearables and start to take that data in a collaborative way to glean new insights. And then you asked about in telemedicine. If you think about, I come from Stanford at medical school there. There's a platform there called biodesign. It's all about finding an unmet need, a pain point that you need to solve for. And now we have some new technologies from mobile and AI and robotics and 3D printing and nanotech and genomics that we can solve things in new ways. So one problem we all see as physicians, I trained at Boston Children's in pediatrics and Mass General in adult medicine, is how do you pick the right drugs for a patient? When you're an adult, everyone gets the same dose. When you're a child, we try and dose it by weight. So I thought that medicine needs to be more intelligent and also more integrated. So the telemedicine platform I'm building is literally a sort of a way to 3D print medications. So instead of having, let's say, an older patient taking 5 drugs in the morning, you could print them into one medication, use AI and genomics to start picking the right drugs and doses, and eventually take your data, whether it's your blood pressure, your weight, your mood, and utilize that in ways to continually optimize and maybe print a new pill each day. So that's that. Maybe if you pull my slides up, which I think you had, I'll just do like 5 minutes maybe to summarize some of these other pieces moving forward. So I'm lucky to chair medicine at something called Singularity University. We look at how do technologies accelerate, how do we put them together in new ways to solve grand challenges from poverty, education, healthcare. And if you have my slides, I'll just run through a couple of examples.
Включите, пожалуйста, слайды.
Yeah, look for a second ago. Let's see. But for all of us, the challenge is to be able to think a bit ahead. We're in 2020. 2020 used to be the future, right? 2010, in the last decade, a lot has happened. I mean, basically, it's only been 13 years since the first iPhone came out. Twitter came out 12 years ago. Airbnb is new. All these things have changed pretty dramatically over the last decade. The next decade will make the last 10 years look slow. So it's our opportunity, as we're thinking about the day after tomorrow, to not underestimate what's going to happen with what can fit in your Apple Watch or inside your contact lens, or where we'll be at $100 genome, and the ability to do that sort of precision, personalized medicine that we just heard about at Boston Children's could be scaled from one patient to millions. Okay, so here's I'm just going to try and quickly, if we connect this technology. AI is easy, AV is hard. This isn't connected. Can we connect this one? Can we switch? We'll switch. Let's see if this one does it. Nope. Can we just advance my slides? All right. I don't need slides. But if you can get them back up, that's helpful. So what is an exponential technology? I think we're all familiar that our smartphones, again, have gotten magical. I showed earlier in the last presentation my antique iPhone 10. It's 10 years old. 10 years ago, this was pretty amazing. Now it feels slow and clunky. Now these, of course, are becoming healthcare platforms that can truly take us from an era of very reactive sick care to one where we're continuously tracking our data, whether it's how we're typing and moving, which can be insights to our mental health, to connecting labs, using the camera or our vital signs. So we can start to have real continuous data that can then become much more real time and lead us to an era where we're crossing this whole paradigm of optimizing our health and prevention, health span, doing earlier diagnostics. Some of that can be picked up by our sleep data, by our phone data. We can be doing therapies that are much more mobile in real time and evidence-based. And then the most important one that we all can contribute to is discovery. We all can start to become data donors and start to share information. So the slides are going all over the place here. There we go. So we're here today. 2020 is already pretty amazing. I want to challenge all of you to think what's going to be possible in 2025 and 2030. And the implications for that from each of us as patients to us who are trying to reimagine healthcare to the implications for business and society. So let me just run through a couple of examples of where things are shifting. One is, to change from healthcare to sick care, from sick care to healthcare, and that changes where healthcare is happening. We're starting to admit patients to their home instead of to the hospital. We're starting to create, at this convergence of technologies, whole new spheres, whether it's drug design, AI designed drugs, all the way to apps that you might prescribe to help with smoking cessation, or that can be helpful for mental health. So there's going to be this there already are a whole new set of technologies, many of which have only existed for 10 or 20 years, at this convergence of technology and healthcare. And we're seeing now the big players come in, Amazon's, Google's, Facebook. The fact that Amazon, which knows about all our consumer behaviors, is starting to get into the pharmacy space and may soon be delivering our drugs by drone is not science fiction. So as we start to touch our Facebook and our Google and our Amazon type platforms millions of times a day, that shifts things up, and how and where we can deliver care is going to be definitely augmented. And we're seeing really this disruption come across many industries. Pharma, it's no longer going to be the one-size-fits-all drug. It may be the printed drug I mentioned. It may be the truly personalized one that can be using synthetic biology and beyond. So the business models for big companies are set to shift from sort of the one-size-fits-all to truly personalized, proactive, and hopefully evolving, where we can move from 10 years of work to do a clinical trial and with 50% failure to ones where trials can be done in weeks or months. So I run a program called Exponential Medicine. The theme there is about convergence, but also bringing in the regulators. Like, this is the head of digital for the FDA. How do you start to think about software as a medical device? Because the traditional device or drug is now blending. So we need to bring the regulators across the world into this thing to speed up where we take things. I'll probably stop with all the slides here in 1 minute. I'm going to become a couple of interesting examples. But with some of these new tools, we can measure all sorts of things in new ways. We can put sensors in socks to pick up the health of a diabetic patient. I have socks, actually, by the way, that are very personalized. They have my personal genomic code based into their color scheme. Now that's one way to engage patients in their own genome. But now, as we enter a $100 genome, what happens when every patient's sequenced? What happens when your smartphone now can take, with your camera on your smartphone, can pick up your heart rate and your blood pressure and continually measure that and enable you to manage hypertension in new ways. When the cameras around us can pick up hotspots that might indicate early cancer. When our voice can become a biomarker for both heart disease or potentially neurologic or mental health issues. Many new ways that we're going to dissolve in terms of ambient measurement into our environment, so we're not wearing anything. So that gives us an opportunity in this continuous era to take this data and use it proactively. I'll stop there for now. I could keep going. I think the main challenge, though, is taking all this new data, and it's often stuck on our smartphone, integrating it at Stanford now, I can send my data to my doctor. He doesn't yet know what to do with all this data. No clinician or patient wants all the data. We need to integrate that into something that's synthesized, that's meaningful, so that we can not just look at Fitbit data or our sleep data, but use that to guide in a very integrated manner. I like to call it predictalytics, where each of us can learn, share our data, and really catalyze healthcare for everybody around the planet.
Даниэл, спасибо большое. Те технологии, которые вы показали, они...
Thank you very much. The technologies that you shared, of course, they simplify our life. They make our life easier. And of course, I would say that almost each of these technologies means a collection of big data and processing of this data. And that is why there is a need to understand how we can store this data and how to do it in a safe way, and what kind of rules we could have for transferring this data, for example, to the doctor. We need to have special rules as to how this information can be transferred to the doctor.
In San Francisco at UCSD, we now have access to, I think, 5 million medical records that they've de-anonymized, so you can't tell who they are, and they're now able to compare outcomes for treating diabetes at UCSF versus UCLA, and start to now use the whole system to continually learn. And all of us are concerned about our data, but to give the simple example, 12, 15 years ago, we all still drove with paper maps, and we might get lost and have to stop for directions. Now we all drive with Google Maps or Waze, and we're used to donating our driving, our speed and location, pretty private data, to build that map of our driving path. What if we had a bit of that same mindset, while being mindful of privacy, to all become data donors, to build that healthcare map so that we're all benefiting from the journey, how to stay on the right path, where the police are, what's the fastest way to get to our health destination. So while privacy is certainly a concern, it can also hinder progress. In the United States, we have HIPAA. These laws were built in the 1990s, before the digital age. So we need to be smart about not being overbearing with regulatory as well.
Спасибо большое. Я бы хотела сейчас...
Thank you very much. And now I would like to move on to a different trend, which was also specified by experts. This is robotization of surgery. And we are very lucky because at our panel we have Dmitry Pushkar. And if I understand correctly, the first surgery with a Da Vinci robot was made at 2008. Since then, it's 12 years already. What has changed, actually, including during the process of robotized surgery? What is new and where we are going to? Well, thank you very much for this invitation. And this medical conversation is a very specific conversation. This is the conversation that gets very specific meaning. It's not a conversation about nothing. And in connection with this, I really liked the presentation of Catherine, the presentation of a very specific example. And well, for you, possibly, it's already today. And or it is going to come very soon. And for many specialists, for us, for instance, robotic surgery, if we go to any website and see presentation about the future, and we are urologists, clinicists. I'm so happy to be invited clinicist immediately at this very session in this group. Why? Because we are very far, and this is our strength, and that is why I'm not alone here today. I'm with a person with whom we are also very far, but at the same time we are very close. This is with molecular biologists with whom we work together. Why? Because if we consider a huge number of different topics that we are discussing, then there is robotic technology, there is personified medicine, which was specified by Catherine. And what we got as a result? I would like this clicker to operate, if possible, or next slide, please. So what we got as a result? Back, please. Yeah. So finally, we have to completely change the whole system of thinking when we're dealing with robotic surgery. And basically, that took us 20 years. And today, if you ask me how robotic surgery is developing, we should possibly think that for the 20 years, considering the fact that robotic surgery became the cheapest way of treating a patient from cancer at early stage. This is truly the cheapest way. Unfortunately, today, we often have to fight for robotic surgery, and in Europe, robotic surgeries make 45%. In the USA, 70%. And speaking about a very specific example, so today we would like, first of all, to claim that in the future we would like to deal without surgery, we would like to deal without medicine, And we would like not to speak about medicine at all. This is future. That is why I'm really interested in Cohen's presentation, because he wrote about this. And because we have to somehow control it. And it said that this is preventive medicine. That is finished. That is finished.
Кончилось. И это очень важно.
So that is over, and it's a very important moment. So that is why today, together with Professor Granovskaya, who works with us for many years, we are speaking about the point that truly the future is different from what it used to be. The same thing happened 100 years ago, totally the same. And after so many years, before the implementation of what we consider it routine life, but what is routine for us, it's not everyday and routine for others. We should think about it as well. Why? Because only 10% of patients get access to robotized surgery that is in the world. And that is why, if today you speak about this in other countries, they will tell you, so our future after 1, 2, or 10 years is robotic surgery. For us, it will be the past, maybe. And this is a very important aspect. So today, it is for the first time that we are saying that this year, last year, FDA approved medical algorithms. And I would like later on Catherine and Daniel to comment upon that. Why? Because approval of medical algorithms means implementation of this algorithm into insurance system. Implementation of algorithms in insurance system is complete change of healthcare. That is why we are going to have complete alteration of healthcare in the future. We should basically understand that we are going to deal with our health in a totally different way, and this is the most important thing, to get without surgery, to get without medicine, and actually to face a totally different medicine. A very simple thing. This is a totally different story. A simple thing which makes it possible only to find a vessel. Well, looks like this is a very simple situation, to find a blood vessel and to reach this. It's not personification, even though it's also a personification. It's also very interesting. Today we are saying that we are not going to learn on people. That is today. If we reach this after 5 years, this will be very good. Marina Viktorovna, if you take a mic, and you do have it, and please comment what we are doing, what we are discussing every day. So if today we are saying what is my weapon, well, of course I'm armored with robotic technology, of course I'm armored with artificial intelligence, but this artificial intelligence unfortunately is this and nothing else, as well as all of us. So my artificial intelligence, unfortunately, I'm speaking about surgery today, is limited by A, knowledge, B, education, and C, the stage of disease at which I get the patient. So, and as to the stage of disease, Madam Granovskaya is responsible. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can I have the clicker, please? Well, the problem consists in the point that such stories that were mentioned by Catherine, when a patient comes and in one hospital you can do totally everything, you can deal with this in a very personal way, and then go there at a scientific laboratory, make a model for zebrafish and test everything. And these are single cases, and they're only in a situation when a system allows you to go through all the barriers. And here in clinics, doctors often see a patient without proper diagnosis. And I believe that we had a very interesting thing happening. 5 years ago, 2 years ago, we were speaking about personification of medicine. And we thought that now we are going to sequence genome and will solve all the problems. However, it was not enough. Then we were speaking about the fact that this should be the right patient, this should be the right cohort, but now we actually jump over predictive medicine and personified medicine and make it preventive medicine. And that is what was mentioned by Daniel. And preventive medicine is mostly oriented not to a cohort or population research, but by a specific case, to the cases that were mentioned by Catherine. And then we get into a totally different dimension. And this slide is taken from a report of Nobel Prize winner of Seattle Institution, who was the first to establish company integrating all personal data, and this is a kind of a pie genome, proteome, cytogenes, and so on and so forth, and immunological profiling, and these are stem cells, and so on and so forth, and in iCloud for one patient. And now just imagine how much data, number A should be integrated and B should be analyzed by a doctor. So that is why we actually skipped to an epoch which is called the end of average, and now we're thinking not with the standard of population genetics, not with the standards of population medicine, but not with the general clinical research, and even niche researches are questioned now. So preventive medicine is not a collection of data. Actually, this is just finding a specific point for every patient when he can be shifted into a disease from where he lost his health. You would ask me, but this is kind of futurism. I will tell you, no, this data exists, and it exists from 14th, 15th year. Of course, they are taken from MIT, from Harvard, from UCLA. And lots of this data was generated by a famous futurologist and futurologist of technologies, Jim Hiss, who is working in Seattle with Leroy Hood. And the task of preventive medicine and the task of a surgeon is to consider at which point of his health to the final part his patient is, and to select such a treatment which would bring him back to health condition. And the question, how are we going to use this colossal number of data which are in iCloud but are not integrated. And now we have created a whole direction. It's not only systematic medicine, but this is network medicine, when every disease is considered as a large network of failures and possible recoveries. And if we quote Galileo Galilei, then any knowledge starts with mathematics, and as biology and systematic biology, personified medicine becomes combination out of the question of fundamental knowledge, which made it possible for Catherine very quickly cover these prohibited parts and reach a good result. And this fundamental knowledge, which was turned into deep reasoning, and also the huge number of data, which is turned into deep learning. Then we go to Daniel, we integrate all of that, and then we get cases which will be specified by Dmitry Yurievich. You know, a specific example which happens today, I'm not going to speak about it for a long time. Well, speaking about a cancer, this is the main killer in urology, because the prostatic cancer with early diagnosis is solved, but actually depending on the cancer of kidney with the technology of multispectral MRT, we can find a tumor starting from 5 millimeters and do ablation of this tumor. It is well practiced in Moscow and Russia. Cutting of the kidney, we actually keep the organ, but we should remember that 40% of surgeries in Europe are done from open access, and in 2020, this is the data which are very important for all our panelists. I'm firmly convinced. As to the tumor of urinary bladder, you could read, if we speak about a woman of 69 after resection, now we can understand what was the way of this patient measuring aggressiveness of the disease and reaching this patient targeted 30 years plus with her own bladder quite often. Why? Because we understand that no matter how well we know this surgery, actually this makes a person invalid, and medicine of 21st century is here. Well, unfortunately, it's just accelerating. It's like this in all over the world, and our collaboration with other specialists is the future, is true future, and maybe it can happen the day after tomorrow. Well, I would like to have it today. A surgery, cyborgs, authors, managers who know how to start and how to finance these molecular specialists who immediately help us, and we cannot do without them. Artificial intelligence that can move the hands of a human, but so that he would be able to control it, the human. And I believe that first and foremost we must differentiate between the bubble which we see, which we imagine, from the real life that we are going to have. Thank you very much for the invitation once again. Well, thanks again, and I would like to remember the phrase that we discussed, that for the first time medical algorithms were reconciled. And Catherine, could you please comment upon the influence of this initial reconciliation of algorithms to development of medicine?
Well, I work on the rarest of the rare cases, so chances are any algorithm will have been applied and failed before it actually comes to me. But on that end, I welcome that, because the triaging of patients and the misdiagnosis rate and the failure rate of even these advanced techniques where it's just a fluke, an error. It's always very upsetting when we get a batch of sequencing back and it's a known mutation that should have been caught way at the beginning, or it should have been able to have NLP of the medical record and figure out from the history of medications, the symptoms of the patient, that this is what's actually the diagnosis, and it shouldn't have remained undiagnosed for 7 years. So this is a very US-centric view. I'm very happy that these algorithms are finally becoming accepted. It's been a long road coming. And being able to bill for these kind of treatments and have them become even not standard practice, but more standard, is going to be a very welcome thing. I think one thing that I personally would like is when there isn't the algorithm, or there should be, and it's not accepted, it gets to us and we waste a lot of money and time on it, that we are able to turn around and say, you know what, this should have been caught by insurance. This is a failure below us, and we should be able to send them a bill.
Екатерина, если вы позволите.
Catherine, if you allow me, you know it is very important that we welcome Catherine here with us. I'm very pleased, and you know, we should understand somehow. Well, for a Russian word, algorithm, well, algorithm is not very much different from clinical recommendations. And could you please explain as to American medicine, for American ear? So we understand what algorithm is and what is its difference from clinical recommendation. It's an important thing for the audience.
What I'm seeing this as is more of an acceptance of the technologies that were illustrated in the previous session, where it is taking the wearables, taking the monitors, taking robotics. We have a huge robotics team at Boston Children's, and being able to accept that data. And it doesn't have to be face-to-face with a clinician in the very traditional way of having a clinic visit in order for that to be accepted in the medical record, utilized data. I guess that's what I was meaning by algorithm.
Абсолютно.
Absolutely.
Абсолютно.
Absolutely, that's very important to understand for everyone. Algorithm, this is the first step. It's actually a step forward to digitalization. Why? Because this change, you know that clinical recommendation, the main disadvantage of it is that it imposes certain limits on us and limits on our movement. As for clinical algorithm, this is a road, a highway with 10 lanes where we understand perfectly well what we could see within this space. It's very important, and since it is taken as a kind of guideline for further action, it's of course going to change the medicine. Thank you very much. And now we are moving forward, and I would like to ask Koen Kasa. I would like to give them the floor. He's a medical futurologist, entrepreneur. And my first question will be about nanotechnologies. That is another trend that was discussed by all the experts when we talked about the future of the medicine last year. So could you please say nanotechnologies as a trend? Do you think they are going to change medicine? Will they allow us to make a medicine more targeted and personalized?
What I believe that we are in this era now. This comes from Asimov, the world inside. And indeed, nanotechnology allows us to start digging into a human body, but it's always about thinking about restoring sickness and curing disease. Well, if I look back to the first trend, you mentioned, can we switch sick care into healthcare? And what I would like to do is take you to a few slides where I think which really show what the future look like, and that nanotech helps, but nanotech is not something aspirational. I think making Moscow healthy, you can be way more aspirational. And this is something I stole from Sochi. You might have seen this. This comes from an ad where someone who was moving 20 times to his knees within 2 minutes got a free ride on the metro. This, in my opinion, is future healthcare. You prevent things from happening by making it fun. What you see at the left is Mexico 2019. Every metro station in Mexico is being installed with the same machine you used at the joke here in Sochi. How cool is that? So we start to pay people to remain healthy. And that is something we have been at 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, the Chinese doctor was paid to keep people in the village healthy. How cool is that? And could we build that again? And that's how we look to the world. We look to technology, but we make it delightful. Look to this. This is a Wi-Fi wall at the beach in Peru. And only in the shadow you get Wi-Fi. This is digital, mobile, fun, nicely designed, and prevents me from getting skin cancer, right? So if you can start to think about technology, which changes behavior and creates experiences, then all of a sudden the world starts to look different. And I'm going to show you a few examples, also from the same examples as Daniel and Catherine showed earlier. The device you see at the left is the first device which allows me to sequence my genome in just 3 hours if I like. And this is my father at the left, who had a double infection of the lungs a few years ago, ready to die because not a single bacterium was growing on a Petri plate when they hoped to find the bacteria to treat with a drug. After 3 days, nothing was growing and he was ready to die. So we took a small sample from the lung, sequenced every bacteria in it in 3 hours, and after 3 hours we got the right antibiotic. That's from 3 days to die to 3 hours to treat, which is better, but not good enough because he got sick in the first place. So when I sequenced myself, and that's my background basically, trying to understand biology, is I found out that I will get blind. I don't know when, but knowing this was a super insight because since then I take one supplement which should delay the degradation of the back of my eye. But it really got fascinating when the first algorithm, which is also referred to, came on the market, which no longer requires a doctor, but allows me to scan my retina basically every few days. And now I can be responsible, together with what I eat, to follow up with a software as medical device algorithm what is happening with me. So the combination of knowing something from biology and having a sensor starts to allow you to look to the world in a different fashion. And let me try to ask you a question. Who of you already has access to his or her genome? Can you raise hands? In the audience. That's not a lot. Imagine the assembly will pay you to get yourself sequenced. Who wants it? No, that's not possible. Please, who wants to have access to his genome? That's the lowest number I've ever seen. Most of the times it's because of Angelina. Angelina lost her mom to ovarian cancer, decided to do a very small sequence analysis, turned to be predisposed to get cancer, and removed the 2 breasts. And that's very often the reason, how can I deal with it? Till I show this. This is the first bra, which is in clinical development, which contains a tiny sensor, which sits at the inside of the sensor on on Angelina's breast, and only if a tumor starts to grow, the sensor measures that. Imagine nothing happens, I still have my 2 breasts. And if it happens, maybe I'm 65, the kids are out of the house, and basically the decision becomes easier. If I show this to my students, 1 in 5 turns 4 in 5, and technology allows me to change behavior big time. The same with men. If I ask, are you willing to be sequenced to find out whether you get colon cancer? The majority of men say no, because then you put a tube in the back of my body. I don't want that. Well, we no longer do that. We now have small capsules, which make 360-degree pictures of our intestines, are better than what we've ever seen before, and turn 1 in 5 people saying yes into 2 in 5, 3 in 5. And that I find fascinating. This is nanotech-ish, but allows me to change behavior to the better. Now, don't rely on it always. This is a pretty cool way to get people tested for cancer. This is a hospital which installed a man's cave in order to convince people to come to the hospital and get tested. And that's also what is called delight, right? Now, if I start to think about combining things beyond the things you have heard, then yes, there is a large number of sensors coming out, apps coming out. The big problem for doctors is, what can you trust? And for that, we recently launched a database, which is a database with every single certified digital health tool. If you look to the app stores from Google and Apple, you find 130,000 of these. This database contains only 180. That's not a lot. But as a medical doctor, I would love you to know the list, or at least to realize what can be used. Because these tools will help you to become a better doctor, to start extending your capabilities with digital tools and start to look like the Chinese doctor who was basically better in helping me. And that trust is important. This is a hospital in St. Louis in Missouri. It's called Virtual Mercy. And from the outside, it looks like every hospital you know. But at the inside, there is not a single patient, no beds. Every patient is monitored at home. And this is not about technology. This is about the hospital building trust for the doctor and the nurse, who has 6 screens, and the doctor and the nurse are still responsible for the patients. And that is the future. I'm going to use technology, getting your trust, making your life better, richer, so that you can become a better doctor. And this is a few examples just to show you. This is Nestle in Japan. In Japan, I can make a picture of what I eat. And based on the picture, the algorithm tells me what I should add. Well, is that good enough? Well, that's not good enough. So there are solutions like this. This is something you can test, maybe not in Russia yet, but which I find really remarkable. I can make a picture of my menu in the restaurant. And with augmented reality, basically the menu is recognized, and basically I see on the picture, on the menu, which items are fine based on my biology, based on my basically sensor data, and all of a sudden I get the delightful experience in the restaurant, which is no longer kind of what I associate CK with. And to Dan's point, yes, we start to be able to measure things which you couldn't even envision in the past. I don't have to ask what you drink and how much you drink. I can simply look to the movement of your wrists, and basically, if you drink coffee, that's a different behavior than drinking tea. So basically, wrist size movement is enough to start feeding an algorithm as a diabetic to be, for me, that better doctor. And you're seeing that picture from Dan at the left as well. And how we use that is the following. If we start to be able to measure data in a future life 24/7, then we can start to think about creating wisdom and start to anticipate things. And we can start to remove the biggest friction in sick care, which is getting sick in the first place, which I think you agree is kind of delightful. So how are we doing that in Europe? Well, this is a simple picture of the city where I live, in the north of Belgium, Antwerp. And in Antwerp, we are measuring pretty sensitive what is happening in the city. How many people cross red lights, which planes cross the city, what the temperature is, what the humidity is. And all these data we combine with my personal data, with my brain scans, with my voice tech, with my social media data, and we combine them in making, for the first time, digital copies of people. Digital twins, if you like. And always there, this picture, I guess you recognize. It's a copy of all the sensor data used to make a car. And that digital copy, I first use, even I haven't done an ID, to make a better car. I don't spend energy, resources, and time. I first have to prove on the model whether I can improve it. And that's what we're currently doing in Europe, in a huge project, $1.5 billion. It's called Healthy You, which I oversee. And Healthy You is aiming to provide every European with an avatar, a digital health, twin, which is trained by all the data a doctor should know to predict the 5 most common chronic diseases by 2030. And therefore, the way we look to the world is a little bit like Big Hero 6. If you haven't seen that movie, download it. It's about 5 friends which get to know a 6th one, a big inflatable marshmallow robo-doctor, Baymax, who lives in my home and flips now and then, crosses my shoulder and says, Koen, I know something you didn't know, which is going to make your life more exciting, richer, nicer, and is going to keep you healthy. And this way, we're going to use technology to blend in the background and to go back to that Chinese doctor who was paid to keep me healthy. And now we're going to have companies, resources, organizations which build on that and basically start to provide that services so that they can shine, becoming health companies as well.
Спасибо огромное. Это
Thank you very much. It's very impressive. So today we have already talked about perfection of technologies, about its changes, and about how actually technologies can affect our lives. We talked about some dramatic changes and what we need to change in our healthcare system. We also talked about a need to change our behavior and an effort to make it more conscious, something that could allow us to preserve our health and to avoid treatment when it's not necessary. And now I would like to give the floor to our speaker, who decided to move even further, and he decided to talk about perfection of the human body himself, of the person. Could you please say how you make yourself even more perfect and how humankind will be changing based on those new technologies?
An unusual visual condition called achromatism, which means that I see things in grayscale. So I grew up not seeing color and not really understanding what color is, because even if people explain to me what color was, if you've never seen color, you can't really imagine what color is. So with my parents, we went to the doctor, and the doctor said it was impossible for me to see color, that there was no solution. So I left with the idea that I would never be able to perceive color. So in the field of medicine or doctors said this was not possible. So then I started thinking about other ways I could perceive color, and I was interested in a theory by Isaac Newton that related each color of the rainbow to a musical note, and I thought it would be beautiful if actually this theory could become a reality, because both color and sound, they have something in common. They're both frequencies. So Newton was right. There is a relationship between color and sound, and it's that color and sound vibrate, basically. So I started to try to find a way to perceive colors, and then instead of going to see doctors, I went to see students that were studying robotics, and I asked them if they thought it would be possible to create a system that would allow me to hear the vibrations of color. And to my surprise, the answer was yes, for sure, it would be really easy. So that's what I started doing 16 years ago. We created a system that would allow me to hear the vibrations of color. So instead of seeing color, I would be able to hear color. So we created a system, which is an antenna, because I didn't want to use a tool to hear color. I wanted to hear color, so I wanted to have a new organ that would be implanted in my body. So I thought that an antenna that would allow me to hear color would be the best option. So we designed the antenna, and the antenna worked, but then I needed a doctor to implant the antenna. So I had to go back to the world of doctors, and then I asked them if they could implant this antenna inside my head so I would be able to hear color. And they said no. They said you would have to go through a bioethical committee. So I had to present the antenna surgery to a bioethical committee, and they said it was not ethical to have this antenna implanted in my head for 3 reasons. One, because it's not a pre-existing body part. So most bioethical committees will not accept the inclusion of a sense or organ that is not traditionally human. In this case, it's an antenna. Which is not an arm or a leg, so it's not ethical for some to have implanted a non-human pre-existing body part. The second reason, well, the antenna goes beyond the visual spectrum. It perceives infrareds and ultraviolets as well. So it's not only the visual spectrum, it's also infrareds and ultraviolets. So going beyond the visual spectrum, they didn't find it ethical either. And the third reason was that they were very worried about the image the hospital would have if someone came out with an antenna sticking out of the head. So they said no to the surgery, but they helped me find a doctor that was willing to do the surgery anonymously. So the antenna was surgically implanted in my head by an anonymous doctor, and since then I am merged with technology, and I can sense all colors through vibrations directly into my head. The advantage of the antenna is that it goes beyond the human spectrum, so I can sense if there's ultraviolet or infrared in a room, and sometimes sensing these colors can be actually useful, as it was just mentioned before. If we all sensed ultraviolet, we would probably not get so many like skin problems. If you sense that there's a high level of ultraviolet, you definitely would avoid the sun, because if you sense there's a high level of ultraviolet, you know that this can be dangerous, so then you would avoid. But we don't sense ultraviolet, so we don't avoid it. So the more senses we have, the more aware we'll be of the dangers that surround us. So I think that in the future we will see more people including or adding new senses to extend our perception of reality. And since then we've created other senses, like an implant in my knee that allows me to sense where the magnetic north is. So sensing where the north is something that for some it might be just interesting, but it can also be very useful if you have if you have difficulty in orientating yourself by simply having an organ that allows you to sense where the magnetic north is. It can allow you to not get lost so easily. We also created an implant that is a tooth that when you click you can send a vibration to someone else, and then when the other person clicks, you can receive a vibration in your mouth. So it allows you to communicate from mouth to mouth. If you learn the Morse code, you can communicate from mouth to mouth. It's also, we see it as art, but it can also be used in the medical field if you are completely paralyzed and you cannot move, but you can still move your mouth. You could communicate with other people via Morse code by clicking, and you can have a translator from Morse code to spoken voice, so that you can actually communicate with people through this new organ. And there's a list of other sensory organs that we've been creating since then as an art. We see it as an art, but it can also be used in the medical world and in the medical field or in social life for other reasons. So I think that slowly bioethical committees will start seeing that the more senses we have, the more chances we have of being aware of our surroundings, and this can actually help prevent future problems. Like, for example, having a tail implanted that would give you a better sense of balance. This would avoid falling. So when you're 70, 80, 90 years old, you don't want to fall. So instead of using a stick, you could have a tail that gives you a better balance. So the more organs or sensory organs we have, I think the more we'll be able to adapt to our planet, and this might be useful for many people.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. It's a very unusual and very interesting thing that you have spoken about, but we are very lucky, because now I would like to introduce another cyborg to you. This is Manel de Acos. Please stand up, who only 1 week ago implanted a special chip in order to sense changes of temperature and humidity, and this can become a basis to do weather forecasts. Are you ready to tell us something? Why you have implanted that? How do you sense that?
Yes, you can use this. Of Dmitry is away right now, so you can take it, play it there. Yeah. Just push the button, please, down there. Yeah.
Hello everyone, yes. So yes, I'm Manuel de Aguas, and well, the last, what you see is a couple of rings that I implanted last week in Japan, and they are to perceive the humidity, temperature, and atmospheric pressure through sound inside my head. So my aim was basically to extend my perception of the weather. I've always been interested in the weather phenomena and like more specifically rain. So I decided to start creating a new body part that would allow me to extend this perception and basically to improve or to extend or to learn the ability of predicting the weather, not just looking at the sky or looking at my phone, but feeling it directly in my body. So for many, like during the past, we've seen people like predicting the weather in these different ways, like looking at the sky or studying the weather data. But my aim is to be able of learning this weather forecast through my own body. I think this maybe we use weather forecasts to prevent us from doing different like activities during the day. For example, if you do sports of risk in a bad weather day, this would be dangerous for you. But then you need to know exactly what is the weather that will be in the near future. So I think this kind of new body part would also can like prevent you or prevent like to be in danger due to the weather. So by the moment, another thing is that I had to go to Japan to implant these two fins in my head, because in Barcelona I had like in different times like the proposal was denied. So I had to find a doctor that wanted to implant the couple of fins in my head. And by the moment it's something different, it's something difficult for us, like to find doctors that are willing to do transspecies surgeries, is how we call it. Surgeries that involve the implantation of new body parts in the body. But there's like always professionals that are willing to do them, but it's still something that we need to advocate for, and I hope this gets easier in the future. Yes, thank you.
Manuel, спасибо большое.
Well, thank you very much, and I know that you have established Cyborg Foundation, and this is community, this is a platform that has a target to promote art of cyborgs and protection of rights of cyborgs. And could you please speak about this? I already understood that you have faced different problems related to operations. Emmanuel had to go to Japan to do this surgery. You had to search for some surgeon who would agree to do that, but it's not the only potential limitation in rights that you face. What are the dangers you see, and how do you suggest to deal with those?
Most governments separate laws that relate to humans and laws that relate to technology, and they're not talking about citizens that are technology. In my case, I am technology, so there should be rights involving the fact that part of my body is robotic, or that part of my body has internet. My antenna has internet, so internet is not a tool for me, but it's a part of my sensory system. So I can be, for example, physically hacked. If there's I've heard that last year there was a hacker here. So if a hacker would be here in this room, he could easily start sending colors to my head, and that would be interfering with my perception of reality. So there's no laws, for example, talking about what happens if someone hacks someone's sensory system via the internet. So laws involving the internet as a sense need to be discussed, and that's why many governments are starting to talk about cyborg laws or robotic laws. Then there's also accepting these new body parts as body parts. So if someone pulls my antenna, now some judges would consider it damage to property, but this should change. This should be seen as physical aggression, not as damage to property. So that's why we think these cyborg rights need to be addressed. And then, well, there's like 5 basic ones that are online, 5 basic rights that most governments are interested in at least discussing it. But yeah, the biggest challenge is bioethical committees. Once bioethical committees start accepting transspecies surgeries as ethical, which is simply the addition of senses and organs that are not traditionally human, then I think we'll start seeing more citizens merged with technology.
Thank you. Daniel,
Daniel, well, now we were speaking with Neil, and we understand that the questions that cyborgs face, this is a very bright part of the problem, but actually, while implementing other technologies, we have no less problems. The legislation is often behind technological and scientific breakthroughs. What kind of barriers, from your point of view, are most considerable, and which stumble development of medical science now?
Great question. I think as we accelerate into the future, our regulatory bodies and our governments are quite linear, so we have a incremental future rather than exponential. And even with these are wonderful examples of things that are possible today, but don't fit under the current scheme of laws or of regulation. I want to just riff on one of these elements. We're almost all transhumanists, cyborgs today. We're all connected to our smartphones, maybe not biologically, but psychologically. One great example that just came out last week at CES by a neuroscientist named David Eagleman. Is a company called Neosensory. You can basically wear a little wearable device that listens to sound and buzzes, and the deaf have been able to learn how to hear just by basically changing where you listen to your skin or to your tongue for folks who can see with a map on their tongue. So lots of new ways we can integrate new signals to connect to our brains. But back to your original question, I think it's imperative now for all of us to help our congressmen, our politicians who often have the handle on setting the incentives and the policies to understand not only what's here but what's coming. Like if we're going to be at a $10 or a free genome in 5 years, what are the implications on everyone's sequence? How do we prevent the abuse of your insurance company or your employer knowing your medical risk and challenging your ability to work or succeed? There's a very interesting movie many of us have seen called Gattaca that was made 22 years ago that was very insightful. What happens when the child is sequenced at birth and has discrimination throughout its life. So I think all of us need to play a role in looking a few steps forward, but even aligning the incentives not just for the regulators but for our healthcare systems. I love the example that you gave on the challenge of thousands of apps. How do you start to not just regulate but sort them? I'm doing a bit of a similar project it's a website called digital.health. We have a lot of tools that a physician or a nurse or a pharmacist or a patient could use. There's no way to even prescribe them today, whether it's an antenna to help you see the environment or an app to help you manage your medications or a wearable to track your blood pressure. There's a lot of noise out there. I think part of this future will be enabling the ability to pay for and prescribe these sorts of digital solutions and the data flow back into a system to enable them to be used in smart private ways, but in which we can all share that data to let everybody's health care improve.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Now we are speaking about barriers and we are touching upon the questions about ethical problems related to digital medicine. And we were speaking about, first of all, about collection and storage of personal data. Which problems do you face being a genetic engineer while doing your research? What do we need to change?
So I have an interesting take on it. Again, I work with the rarest of the rare conditions, and a lot of times every day matters for these patients. So a lot of them don't care about privacy, frankly. That's the least of their concerns. They're like, share my data, put it out there on the internet. I manage 2 of these challenges called the Clarity Challenges, where we actually released medical records and genomic data out to the world and had teams compete to try and diagnose patients. And I think the biggest barrier to me is getting rid of the regulation to be able to do stuff like that when time is of the essence and the patients are willing, and not having to go through a full IRB to get that extra tube of blood or to be able to release the data. And when they come back and say, okay, you need 4 months worth of toxicology in mice, and to be able to say quickly, we don't have 4 months, and to be able to kind of get exceptions for that and to not have that frustration.
Спасибо.
Well, thank you. I believe that when we speak about implementation of new technologies, especially in such area as medicine, more often we face not only with regulatory barriers, which, of course, well, I said that legislation is behind technological development, but one of the most important problems and reasons is perception of consumers of these new technologies, namely of people's readiness to perceive new technologies we're speaking about. But there is also another property of a human conscience. So this is kind of being a reactionist. So we continue doing some things even when we understand that we should not do this. And I have a question to all the speakers. What do you think? What should be stopped doing urgently in medicine and healthcare right now so that we could promote and develop medicine further on?
Stop doing right now to move forward with technologies?
I think healthcare or sick care is always linked to something bad. Going to a hospital is not delightful. So I think the big trick is starting to show that healthcare can be something to look forward to be part of, and to create novel experience where you say, well, I'm willing to join into a study. I'm willing to combine my data with other data to get some insights which by myself I couldn't get. And I think it's the responsibility, not just from a healthcare provider perspective, but from parties which start to see that the biggest good we have is our health, to start to combine things together. And I'm going to give one example. We have the luxury to work with Coca-Cola, and people associate Coca-Cola with, well, unhealthy sugar drinks. Nevertheless, we have gained the mandate to start building an innovation pipeline in healthcare, starting to think, well, if I am basically depressed or anxious, and I can get a Coke out of a Coca-Cola machine, but I put my finger on it, it does do some biometric analysis, measures that there is some stress markers, and adapts the Coke to my biology, physiology, then all of a sudden, Coca-Cola becomes a healthcare company. And we start to see an increasing number of organizations which start to think, how can we not be the bad ones? How can we be the good ones? And therefore, having the ability to start paying people to remain healthy, to my opinion, that's the most aspirational thing you can even build on the planet. And that's, I think, the mind shift which needs to happen.
Just to extend on that, I love the idea of delightful experiences, but we all are wired a bit differently. Some people like badges, some people like points, some have favorite colors blue versus, and I think if we look to the near future of tomorrow of healthcare, it will be one where we're all sequenced, maybe even at birth. We'll have a dashboard for you and your provider to say you have an Angelina Jolie risk of breast cancer, and need to be screened with mammograms standing age 20, or very low risk. And same thing goes for heart disease and dementia and diabetes. So we're not doing one size fits all screenings, but when you do have risk, the ability to intervene and do prevention proactively is designed and tuned to the individual. Some people want, again, to be paid by dollars, or some have other ways of doing that. So I think we have an opportunity to get into sort of a era of precision intervention and prevention that is going to really move the needle.
By the way, we start to see the first insurance company which is insuring me because I'm having cancer. Because there is a risk you can calculate. There's 8% chance I survive. The 6 months that I cannot work, they insure me, and after 6 months I bring all the rest of my policies to the company. So a glass who was half empty, no one should know that I'm getting cancer, is turned half full. And that way of thinking, turning the world upside down, I find that fascinating.
I don't know how to do this, but I think what needs to stop immediately is the misinformation that's getting out there and having a real and negative impact on the ability of healthcare to move forward and actually make steps backwards. Even with my own industry, with just genomic sequencing, let's not even talk about vaccines or things like that, just having to explain how getting sequenced has immediate benefits. Yes, it has risks, but being able to have those risks and benefits in proportion is increasingly difficult due to misinformation. So somehow making that stop, I think, just needs to happen immediately.
I don't really know what needs to be stopped, but I guess as a personal experience, maybe the collaboration of the medical world with other fields would be beneficial. Also to find creativity as well in medicine, not only science, but also the use of creativity to find unthought solutions to situations, I guess.
Thank you. Спасибо.
Thank you. So now we were speaking about technologies of the future, and I believe the most interesting thing is that technologies have been developed not for the sake of technologies, but that they can result for dramatic changes in the whole industry. Just see, we were speaking about that there will be a shift from treatment to prevention. We're speaking about new type of people appearing who are getting perfected due to merging of technologies from different areas. We are speaking about the facts that hospitals will stop looking like buildings and institutions they are now, that insurance medicine will be related to what we eat, and if I eat in a bad way, my insurance cost will grow. We were speaking about diagnosis, monitoring of health condition of a person can be done on constant basis through our food, through water that we drink, and because there is nothing impossible for the water to contain nano-diagnostic particles that would make it possible to make a conclusion about health condition of my organism and about the changes which take place in that. And all that will result that actually tomorrow and not the day after tomorrow, our medicine will be totally different. And even today, we need to make ourselves start thinking about medicine in other terminology and stop constraining the changes that are actually inevitable. Thank you very much. Thank you, our speakers, for this wonderful conversation. All the best.